Let's start off, Lars, with the perhaps unique experience of one Kylian Mbappé. With regards to El Clásico, he scored a hat-trick and he still lost. He did that in the World Cup and all. Is this becoming a habit?
It's becoming a habit for players to do that against Barcelona. There have been several players who've scored hat-tricks against Barcelona and still lost, which I think tells you something about what Barcelona have been like this season. As with Mbappe, I feel like there'll be time and space on the pod to have this conversation. He remains... I would still go to bat for him being the best player in the world. I think there are people who disagree at this point. But he does look like a little bit of a spare part in that Real Madrid team. He does look like he's not quite in sync with the rest of the team. He is kind of operating in the same areas that Vinicius, like all this stuff we've talked about before. And we were all just thinking, well, if anyone can find a solution to this, it's Carlo Ancelotti. And he kind of hasn't. He's left. The solution remains unfound, I would argue. But Mbappe, still very good.
I suppose, Lars, the whole Mbappe thing, it really sort of solidifies what his role is in this La Liga season, in that he is just, although despite the fact he's had a very creditable in many ways in terms of him as a foreign goal scorer in his first season at Real Madrid, had a record-breaking season, he's just a supporting actor in this La Liga season. And he was just a supporting actor in this Clásico as well, in which Barcelona again dominated, 4 wins out of 4 against Real Madrid this season. 4-3 was incredibly flattering to Real Madrid. And in fact, even his hat-trick was really just drawing attention to what Barcelona are about, because they are the best Barcelona team to watch in a decade, comfortably. And I guess they're one major, well, you could say strength and weakness in a way, is the fact they play this really high line, which for Mbappe is like Christmas come early, really, isn't it? When you look at the sort of player that he is, and he's certainly, whether you think he's the best player in the world or not, he's the player who you want in that position, I think, against Barcelona's defence. And, you know, that they defended in a fairly risk inherent way under Xavi, and under Hansi Flick, it's a completely different level. But of course, I think it's talked about as something that's held them back, particularly in the context of the Champions League. But in fact, the way that Barcelona play and that risky way they defend is actually one of their major strengths as well. If you look at the amount of times they catch teams offside, it works more times than not. I know you love the numbers, Lars. They have caught teams offside more than 3 times as much as any other team in the Champions League. They catch teams offside 10 times a game in La Liga. Is extraordinary. And I think it's worth factoring in this Clásico the disallowed goals that Real Madrid had, which kind of points out how they do that very well. So whereas it was a great Mbappe moment, it was just a little footnote, I think, to how brilliant Barcelona are, which is really what their season has been about. And they have shown in all 4 Clásicos just how much better they are than Real Madrid at the moment.
Yeah, just to let the listeners a little bit of daylight in on magic here, to coin a phrase. I mean, whilst Andy was saying that, I was, of course, paying very close attention. But I was also trying to find those offside numbers for myself. I was literally looking them up, and then suddenly, boom, Andy drops the numbers. So that's great. No, I still think... All right, there's every chance I will look enormously... the next coach, Xabi Alonso, will figure this out, and I will look incredibly foolish. But I still think, like, there is something about this Mbappe move to Real Madrid. I know we're going to focus on Barcelona. I'm just going to get this in very quickly. It seems like a symbol of something not good, of a sort of a celebrity, of a cult of celebrity, of maybe a cult of even the Ballon d'Or. Just this idea that we had, you know, Florentino Perez looks at this guy and says he's the most talented guy. You know, he's going to win the Ballon d'Or. We have to have him. He has to be at our club, not somewhere else. What Florentino Perez did not do was look at the team and ask, what kind of player do we need? Because I think any sane person would have looked at a team where Vinicius Jr., who's great at coming in from that left-hand area, is the most important player, and say what we should add is a player who likes to do the exact same thing as what our best player currently does. Like no one builds a squad like that. And like I say, that is a challenge. Xabi Alonso, maybe he'll figure it out, but I still think it's like I look at that signing, and it's the lily has been gilded, and they've also they've brought in PSG's problem of not having enough players who run. Anyway, I'm gonna stop talking about this now, but I still think it's an odd one. Barcelona, much more fun.
Let's get back to those stats, though, Andy. The remarkable stats: 4 Clásicos in a season and 4 wins in the Clásico for Barcelona. That's amazing. Quite apart from them achieving the double, they could have got the treble, as we know.
Close.
That's amazing. All this in Hansi Flick's rookie season. That's just amazing. How has he done it?
Yeah, and you know what? I think, as we've said on previous OTCs, I think he's not a coach who really excited fans when he came in, if we're being perfectly honest. A lot of coaches who they normally would have been interested in weren't interested in them because it was clear that they were under some sort of financial pressure. Some sort of financial pressure is rather an understatement, I suppose.
Don't get me started. Like, I've already taken up enough time.
Yeah, we'll not do that. But I think it was
spend
clear.
Less than you earn, for God's sake.
Well, look, it was clear at the start of the season to anyone that they were starting second behind Real Madrid. They were a long way behind them. Real Madrid looked set for the future, and it looked tough for Barcelona to even compete, let alone go on and be the best team. So I think, Lars talked before about, just because you can go and buy a player or can go and sign a player doesn't necessarily mean that you should. Now, that is advice that Barcelona, if they were self-aware, could have given Real Madrid time and time again. So I guess 2 things have happened really at Barcelona. Firstly, the irresistible quality of some of those La Masia products has just demanded space and time. And obviously, Lamine Yamal is the headliner in terms of that, but Pau Kubasi falls into the same bracket. Other young players who've emerged and helped, and I still feel disappointed actually. Not only that Barcelona didn't get the score that they deserved off the back of this game, but that Fermin goal at the end didn't count, which would have given like a more realistic rounding to the scoreline, making it 5-3. Of course, they celebrated it like Napoli celebrating a goal at the San Paolo in the late 80s, and then it was ruled out by VAR, which of course didn't exist in the late 80s. Some would say thankfully. But the other thing that's happened to them is Hansi Flick. And I think people looked at him being fired by Germany, and that's such an unusual situation, being fired by Germany, and used it to try and discredit him. But the reality is that club management and international management / coaching couldn't really be any different. But what he's so good at, and why people thought he would be good as an international coach in the first place, he's not only a nurturer of young talent, he's a good repurposer of established talent. And I think we've seen that particularly with Rafinha, for example. So I think guys like him, and at the other end of the age scale, Yamal, as we talked about, and then being able to, get other players involved. Like Inigo Martinez, he's a really good example of a player that no one fancied and has turned out to be an absolute, he's so reliable, hang your hat on, for one of the first names on the team sheet kind of guy. So I think that no one is ever going to look at Hansi Flick like he's a Bielsa, which I think is kind of a bit of an image thing, really, because Hansi Flick is not someone who sits and talks at length, a little bit like Zinedine Zidane. He's not someone who sits and talks at length about his philosophies and how the game should be played. The results are simply there and talk for him on the pitch. And I'm not just talking about the X's and O's, but actually the way the players play, the way the players develop collectively and individually. He's so good at it. He did it at Bayern with Jerome Boateng, with Alphonso Davies, with Robert Lewandowski himself, who he's got more out of than has been got out of Lewandowski in years. I suppose you could say with Szczesny as well, coming back from retirement to become a really important fill-in for them. Although I'm sure Marc-Andre ter Stegen will have the place going forward when he gets himself fit. So Flick, because he doesn't eulogise himself and he doesn't allow himself to be eulogised, I don't think he will ever get the respect that a Guardiola or a Bielsa or anyone of that sort of mythology gets. I think he really deserves to have that.
Lars, if he wins the Champions League, he will get the respect though, won't he? And that's the one, I suppose, blots on his copy paper in this season for Barcelona. Okay, Barcelona exited the Champions League to a very, very impressive and still may be the Champions League winners this year in terms of Inter. However, he won the Champions League with Bayern Munich, and there will be expectation now that he's going to do it with Barcelona. This Barcelona that Andy says is the best Barcelona in a decade. How soon does he have to realise that ambition?
Well, the most fun to watch in a decade, I think Andy said. Let's be fair here. But I think on the subject of him getting the respect, there's different kinds of respect. I mean, he's not someone who's who has this whole unique school of thought and is an innovator and all of this and will have millions of tactics bloggers get their keyboards a-clacking. But there is also a category of manager like Ancelotti, like Zidane, who just rack up the trophies and they get a fair amount of respect out of that. And it's possible that Flick is in that category. I wonder, the thing with Flick in Barcelona as an institution, it's a very particular football club. They do things in a very particular way, and because they have a very set and very sort of very solid, very set principles of how to play football, they like recruiting internally. We've seen these so many times over the years. They like to recruit people who have already been in the building, either as players or coaches, or at the very least play guys who, culturally are aligned with them. And that was why Flick was such a surprise hire, because he's not that at all. He's one of the most sort of outside left field appointments they've made in a long time. But I actually wonder if that helps him a little bit, because I was looking at some of the quotes preparing for this pod, some of the stuff Xavi was saying towards the end when he was the coach, and he just sounded like a broken man. He was talking about how the Barcelona job, like, it grinds you down, man. And I wonder if the guys who are really invested in Barcelona more than a club, the biggest, most important thing there ever was, the most uniquest of all the unique, but people who really buy into that, the job, it becomes a really big job for you, man. I think Flick has a huge advantage in the fact that he is an outsider. He is someone who just comes in and tries to do his stuff and do things to his principles. And he doesn't probably read the Catalan sports papers. He doesn't know which board members are feuding over what. I don't think he cares. And actually, in a footballing sense, because he is committed to this incredibly high press and a high line, because he's not afraid to throw kids into the mix, he does actually fit really well to the Barcelona ethos. He happens to be both an outsider who's not burdened with the cultural baggage, and also someone who's a tactically clever. It's proven, and I did not say this at the time, so I'm massively wise after the fact here, but it's proven such a clever appointment.
It has, and you know what? You're absolutely right, I think, about him sort of almost withdrawing from the typical dramas of Barcelona. If you think of what Guardiola had to go through there as someone who was not just a coach, but a manager, a figurehead, someone who was ideologically Barcelona, he found that exhausting, and he's been for the rest of his career at Bayern and City trying to get as far away from that as possible and just coach the team. Whereas Flick, I agree, I think is totally smart the way he's come in, and he does everything in English or German. It's like, well, you can't really ask me on that because, I'm not really culturally adapted yet. Unfortunately, I'm just going to have to answer your questions in English. And I think that's quite clever to do. And you know what? I think it's funny, Dotun, because, if we go back to when Claudio Ranieri arrived at Chelsea and everyone made a massive big deal about how he was using as an interpreter. And it's still sometimes used, but not as much, I think, in English football. Is something that, is the bottom line. You have to be able to communicate in the mother tongue of where you're from. And, you know, some clubs are big on that. I think you look at Bayern in the past have said it has to be a German speaking coach. Dortmund the same. And actually, I think as football gets further down the line, as European football gets further down the line, if you've got a multinational dressing room, it doesn't really matter. I remember David Luiz saying to me when he was at PSG, what's the point in learning French? You know, I can speak Portuguese with this part of the dressing room, French with Spanish with this part of the dressing room, English with this part of the dressing room. There are other lingua francas rather than, you know, it's not anything about respect or disrespect for the place you are, but, you know, you're adapting to a multinational environment which you already understand and you already know, I suppose.
This sets us up for an intriguing 25-26 season in La Liga. If, as expected, Xabi Alonso then goes to become the coach of Real Madrid, there will be some interesting Clásicos. I can imagine that Xabi Alonso understands Hansi Flick and his methods from having sort of been in the Bundesliga for some time. I can't wait for next season in this respect.